win tournaments such as Worlds drop out in, for example, the Octo finals because they couldn't debate a women's debate. So it's really important to have these issues under your belt. So what we're going to go through today is some definitions of feminism, and then we're going to teach you how to think like a feminist, how to analyse like a feminist, and how to argue like a feminist. The amount of time we've got. So, in terms of defining feminism, the first thing that's important for you guys to realise is that there's not really a single definition of feminism. Feminism is more feminisms, it's a movement, a collection of different ideas, and there's as much disagreement between the feminists about what feminism is and what policy outcomes that should mean as there is agreement. However, there is some commonality between the different strands of feminism, and they're a collection of movements aimed at defining, establishing and defending equal political, economic and social rights and equal opportunities for women. So feminism is not about man-hating, and I don't know whether the people here would identify themselves as feminists, but when I was in high school, I thought I was an equalitist, not a feminist. It's like, oh, why feminism? Women don't need special treatment. I believe in equality. I'm an equalitist. But really, I didn't understand what feminism was about and what it meant. And feminism fundamentally is not about the oppression of men. It's about equality for both genders. So the one I put up on the screen, I think, is a good way of thinking about feminism. Although, this is the picture that you came up. So although feminism is not about the oppression of men, it is important to acknowledge that equality does mean that there will be some losers. So obviously, if women are excluded from participating in the workplace, excluded from positions of power, there's more of those positions available to go around to men, and so as we have equality, they're shared around among everybody, and so some men miss out. So we had a controversy last week with the UK Minister for Universities, David Willetts, and I had a very funny picture of him, that hasn't worked. He was talking about the fact that women coming into the workplace is the reason why men have less opportunities in their jobs now. Okay? And there was an outcry because you don't deal with equality of opportunity and social mobility by oppressing half of society and saying, oh, you just stay at home so that everyone else can have more opportunity. It's really about creating opportunity for everybody. So, in terms of how to think like a feminist, it's really important for debates that you can get into a feminist mindset because otherwise you're going to not really understand what the purpose of the debates are. So, who knows who this is? Gail Kelly?
Yeah.
Yep, and who's she?
CEO.
Yep, great. Okay, so in order to think like a feminist, it's important to understand that individual achievements are not necessarily evidence of equality. I like to think about it like scientific research. So if you're conducting an experiment, it's important to have a proper sample size to have valid results. Because if you're just looking at what happens in one case, you might be looking at something that's an exception or an outlier, and you need to look at a sufficient number of cases in order to draw general conclusions. Have some people nodding quickly, being science students in the room. So by looking at the big picture through a gender lens, you can identify structural inequality. And so this is the bias that is built into the structure of organisations, institutions, governments and society, which provides advantages for some members and marginalises other members. So while Gail Kelly has achieved a position of significant power and influence, and also remuneration as the CEO of Westpac, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily equality in the corporate world. So, as we can see here, when we look at the bigger picture, Gail Kelly is only one female CEO of the top 4 banks. But looking at the broader corporate picture again, and looking particularly at the ASX 200, which are the top 200 Australian companies on the stock exchange, we see that there's some some kind of other factors at play, which results in only 8.4% of board directors being women and 2.5% of shares in the ASX 200. And just as way of context, women are 51% of the population and 45.4% of the workforce. This is all Australia. So, what other examples of structural inequality can you guys think of? I gave this session at Buds on Tuesday. They had lots of examples, so come on guys. Where is there inequality that you can identify between men and women?
Like in wages and stuff.
Yeah. Gender pay gap. I have had a note. Luckily it was the first one, otherwise I'd have to rely on it. So, on average, in Australia, women working full-time earn 16.7% less than men working full-time. And female graduates on entering the workforce earn $2,000 less than male graduates. Other examples?
Could we be looking at sort of maternity leave provisions?
Yeah. Yes.
So a lack of maternity leave provision in other cases?
Okay. So that you could look at that in terms of access to maternity leave, but you could also be looking at it in terms of who's responsible for caring in society.
Yeah, the expectation that's what we're doing.
And the fact that most of primary carers are women. Yeah, excellent. Any other ideas?
Like perceptions when choosing to do populations or public structures based on, for example, one's married or childbearing age, there are assumptions made.
And so that might be resulting in what we were talking about earlier.
So possible.
This kind of different in the senior leadership structures, but also looking at the next level down of managers and senior positions in the workplace. Come on, there's at least a couple of easy ones here.
Perception of one being passive and therefore not leadership material or emotional, and therefore things like that, assumptions about these abilities.
Okay, so what we're looking for is where this is playing out. So if you can think of an example of where assumptions about women's leadership abilities or a range of factors are resulting in underrepresentation of women. Sorry? Military, police, parliament. Okay, now we're cooking with gas or building big tools. Okay, so here are just a few that I thought of, and some of the ones that you've thought of as well. So we talked about the gender pay gap. In terms of superannuation earnings, in 2009, the Australian Human Rights Commission found that superannuation balances and payouts for women are approximately half those of men. In things like violence against women, 1 in 3 Australian women have experienced physical violence since the age of 15. Almost 1 in 5 have experienced sexual violence. And intimate partner violence is the leading contributor to death, disability and illness in Victorian women aged 15 to 44. Okay? So this is just about having a gendered analysis and looking for places where the results seem to be different. So, a really sophisticated example. Yep.
Oh, sorry, just had a question at the last slide. What's the difference between the pay gap and the superannuation earnings?
So the pay gap is what you're paid in wages.
Yep.
Superannuation is obviously is measuring what women have when they retire in terms of access to superannuation.
Why do they have less?
Well, that's we're going to talk about that, but we can jump in now. So, for example, superannuation legislation requires that you are paid 9% of your compulsory earnings into super. So, the first reason why women have less superannuation is related to the first dot point, the fact that women are earning 16% less than men in the workforce on average. But there are also other reasons. So, for example, we have the example of maternity leave. So, what happens when you take time out of the workforce and go and look after your kids for a couple of years?
You don't get that.
You don't get paid. And you don't get paid super. Okay? So there's a couple of places that have just begun to introduce contributions when people are on paid maternity leave, but that's kind of cutting edge workplace treatment, and it's only in a couple of enterprise agreements, and by and large, even if you're on paid maternity leave, you don't get any super, and if you're taking more than a couple of weeks off, if you want to take 1 or 2 years off, or you take 6 years off to raise 2 kids and get them off to primary school, that's 6 years worth of superannuation that you're not getting. And so they're the kinds of contributing factors. Also, there are things like the types of jobs that women often have. So women are more often in casualised jobs and often in jobs that are low paid, and there are exclusions and exceptions in the superannuation legislation, which means that some of those people have never got paid superannuation or only got started, had it start to be paid to them relatively recently compared to men. So there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. So a case study of structural inequality is the ASU Equal Pay Claim in Fair Work Australia. So it's a really sophisticated example of identifying structural inequality. So Fair Work Australia is the Industrial Relations Tribunal, and they can make orders to ensure that women receive equal remuneration for work of equal or comparable value. Now, this case seeks a pay rise of approximately 30% for workers in the social and community services industry, and these are people who work in places like homeless and domestic violence shelters, aged care facilities, and other community services. So previous legislation required you, so equal pay has been legislated for quite a while, for a few decades, but previous legislation required the demonstration of deliberate discrimination in the setting of wages in order to be able to have the industrial tribunal make an equal pay order. So you'd have to have something like a business saying, we're going to pay women 80% of the men because the men are better. Or the men have to support their families and women will have husbands who do that. Okay, so these days, that makes it obviously quite hard to prove. The new legislation, you just have to prove that it's work of equal or comparative value. You don't need to prove the intention of deliberate discrimination. So what the ASU is arguing in this case is firstly that the social and community services industry is female dominated, and at least 80% of people employed in the industry are women now. So women do lots of caring work. The work in the industry is undervalued because the services delivered by employees involves caring work, which has a female characterisation, and that explains the undervaluation in pay rates. So what the ASU is comparing it to is similar workers in government employment, so in the state and local government sector. And what they're saying is, if you look at the work that these workers do, who are employed by the government, they have similar skills, similar hours, they need similar qualifications, similar levels of aptitude, but in terms of the pay rates required by the awards that set the minimum pay levels, there's a 30% disparity between what people are paid. And the ASU is arguing that that's because public sector employment was traditionally restricted to men, and so their pay rates went up, whereas this industry has been traditionally and still continues to be dominated by women, and that explains why, even though someone working for government providing community services and someone working in the community sector providing community services do largely the same work, or it's comparable in value, that there's such a different pay rates required. So at the end of the presentation, I've put up a link to the Fair Work Australia website, so if we've got any law students who are interested in having a look at the submissions for that case, it hasn't been decided yet, so we don't know what's going to happen, and obviously it will have a big impact on community organisations' budgets if it does happen, but it's a really interesting example of identifying structural inequality. So, now that you know or have seen a picture of how to think like a feminist and how to identify structural inequality, the next stage is analysing like a feminist. So, this was one of the examples I gave you about pay inequality.
obviously got their traditional doctor degree, and they might be in the end entering into a different industry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can you give an example? No. Okay, so you're saying they're studying to be a lawyer, but
Yeah.
they can't get
They can't get a
a
basic law
position
job,
as
so
a graduate.
yeah, compared with men who are slightly easier chance of getting into the law industry as well.
Okay.
It's another job.
So why do you think that men would have a easier chance of getting those jobs?
Because they're seen as more dominant, or they were able to like push their arguments and everything because they're seen as being more dominant. Law firms are more likely to hire them because
Okay.
they're competitors and stuff.
It's also a better investment, right? If you pour, $20,000 into educating a female graduate, she goes and does her master's, is there for 6 or 7 years, then takes 6 years out to go and have a family, the chance should be of going to your organisation or even come back after having children is really limited. So in terms of like a really callous cost benefit analysis, it is probably better for that firm to hire a man who's a competent skill.
Okay, so both of those are examples of tax discrimination playing a factor. I'm an ex-lawyer now, but when I graduated, I went and did my graduate year at Metropolitan, and out of 20 graduates, 15 were girls. So, so let's think of another, but that's not to say that in all industries that's going to be, that discrimination doesn't occur. So what else could be okay?
Is it the industries that you're entering that are more female dominated and paid less? Like a high percentage teachers, I imagine, are women and they're not being paid very well.
Yeah.
Like perhaps the lawyers graduating and more likely to go into like community legal work than women.
Yeah, okay. So the jobs that people are ending up in are different. So if we've got, I don't know what the graduate profile is, but I know that 70% of the Victorian teaching workforce is female. So if you say that, let's assume that it's similar in terms of graduates, and you've got women becoming predominantly more teachers and men becoming predominantly more bankers and investment bankers and accountants, then the pay rates for those graduates are different. Yeah. Any other reasons that people can think of?
Does negotiation come into it at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Expand that a bit more.
Oh, I mean, could you say that men are better at negotiating, have strict terms or something, or is that just?
Yeah, I've read similar studies where I've always taken a bit of grain of salt. It said that men are better able to kind of toot their own horn, essentially, to sort of say, well, here are the outcomes that I've produced for your company, be able to talk about themselves. They don't, that's like the negotiating partner, whereas women are maybe more reserved and less likely to say why they're a value or an asset to the company.
Yep. There's definitely stuff that research that says women are less likely to negotiate pay. And also, we'll talk about this a bit later, but also the choices that women make in the jobs that they apply for. Women need to feel that they can successfully answer all of the key selection criteria, and they have to feel like overqualified for a job before they'll apply in general, whereas men overall seem to go, oh yeah, I can do 40% of that, I'll learn the rest, I'll throw my head in the ring and I'll see. Okay, cool. So there's some really good analysis coming out of there, guys. What I would like to put to you is that I think there's a spectrum that you can think about in the debating frame about the causes of structural inequality. So if we think of structural inequality as the bias in the system which systematically advantages men over women, we can see that there's a spectrum of barriers from formal barriers, which are the easiest to identify, to informal barriers, and also this questionable notion of choice, which is something we're going to analyse a bit further. So in terms of formal barriers, this is identifying a different legal right or status between men and women. So can people think of an example that exists of a formal barrier to women's participation?
Military, not allowing women on the front line in combat roles.
Yep, okay. So there's a legal or policy prevention from women being able to participate. Another example is women becoming priests. So in religion, it depends on which religion you're looking at, but that's a formal barrier where women are excluded from those positions. Now, widespread in the developing world. So there are countries where women don't have the same legal rights as men. As a small example, in Saudi Arabia, women can't even drive. Okay, so a word of advice in debating though, if a topic selector is crazy enough to set up a topic about formal barriers, I would suggest not to do it. So that's not to say, I guess, for example, in the religious context, that's about kind of rights of women against the rights of religion. So that's a bit of a clash of rights kind of debate. So that's definitely a debate that will come up frequently. But if someone ran a topic like that women should be banned from studying at university, or that it's great that women in Saudi Arabia can't drive, that's going to be a pretty tough neg to those kinds of topics. So, and that's why the rest of the battle for feminism is obviously much harder and more complex, because it's not as simple as changing the law to let women and men do the same thing. So in terms of informal barriers, this is about, even though there are no legal rights that are different, there's no legal prevention of participation, there's unequal access to opportunities still exist. So this can be through direct discrimination, where women are treated differently on the basis of gender. And so we had the examples before coming out when we were discussing it about people saying, I'm not going to hire you as a woman because you might go and have a baby. That would be direct discrimination on the basis of gender. It's also things about indirect discrimination. So indirect discrimination is when the same rule applies to everybody, but some groups are less able to comply with the rule than others. So for example, if a workplace said, we have a policy of not allowing part-time work in our workplace, that would be likely to indirectly discriminate against women because they're more likely to have caring responsibilities. So more women would say, oh, well, I can't comply with this rule to work full-time because I have these other things and other responsibilities. And so even though it's treating everyone the same, it's got an indirect discriminatory effect. The outcome is different on different groups. In terms of choice, I've put quotation marks and a question mark around this idea. So we've had the idea come out about the graduate analysis that maybe females are earning less because they're ending up in different industries that are paid less. Okay? And so that's kind of an argument about choice. That the reason why there's different pay is because women are choosing different fields, women are choosing paths that pay them less. It's really important to think about the different layers of reasons why choice can be occurring. So is it really a free choice? Is it a lack of alternatives? So for example, do women choose to become prostitutes because they want to, or do they choose because they are in places of economic insecurity, drug dependency, don't have other options? Okay? So that's what I mean about considering, is it really a free choice, or is there a lack of alternatives? Are there social or cultural norms, pressures and expectations which are influencing choices? So the toys that girls are given to play with compared to boys, the way they're brought up, what they're told about what their career options are, is that influencing the different choice on a broad structural thing? Or are there underlying structural barriers? So, for example, when considering why less women are choosing to climb up the corporate ladder, are there underlying factors such as lack of access to childcare, lack of equal paternity leave, which means their husbands can't take the time off, that are meaning they're choosing, that they can't choose to have both, they have to, because of the underlying structural barriers. So, if we look at the gender pay gap, some of these things came out today. So, for example, we don't really have a formal barrier to women's participation in the workforce that is explaining the gender pay gap these days. But we do have a number of things that we can analyse in relation to informal barriers preferring men because they think the attributes of men are better in the workplace than those of women. Also, things like the Old Boys Network could be contributing to more opportunities informally through networks and not through merit-based application processes. But in relation to work and family, there was an article in the newspaper today about a business that had only 9% of their management were women, and a new CEO came on board and said, we've got 50% of our workforce is women, only 9% of the managers are women, only a tiny proportion of women going on maternity leave will return to work. And so he realised that it was because of structural barriers in the workplace. They weren't allowing flexible work practices, and so women were having to choose to leave because they had their family obligations. They were incompatible with one another. And so introducing things like allowing people to come into work late or leave work early to pick up their kids, only having executive level meetings after 9 a.m. He introduced all of these changes, which has resulted in a massive increase in women in the senior leadership levels in his company. So this idea that women are choosing to prioritise their family, but what are the structural barriers that are forcing them to have to make a decision in the first place? And then we covered this before. Women are less likely to negotiate about pay, and women are less likely to apply for promotions unless they think they're massively overqualified than men. And so this example in the newspaper was also encouraging people to apply for, encouraging women to apply for jobs that they were good for. So it's not about promoting women that aren't meritorious, but realising that women think about things and are more conservative in their applications than men, and trying to address those cultural differences in their practices. So this is just to say, remember that structural factors can influence choice. So the fact that women are paid less than men means that if a family of both the father and the mother are very feminists and think that there should be an equal kind of responsibility, when they come to making a financial decision about who should stay at home, then because women are paid less, then it's more likely that the woman is going to be staying home, even if it's not because of traditional expectations about the roles of women. Also, then women become the primary carers, and then that feeds into the gender pay gap. Cool. Any questions about that stuff? No. Photos?
I have a question. It might be what's in the context, but I was wondering what levers we have to change that, because when you're talking about formal barriers and that kind of structural inequality, there are lots of things government can do to try to mitigate those and try to stop this from occurring. When you're talking about kind of perceptions and the more kind of subtle and tangible things, what kind of things do we have to help change them?
Yep. Very well done.
Okay.
So, we're putting this into context. I think definitely you need to be thinking in debates, and often the levers that are chosen are going to be given to you by a debating topic. But it's about making sure that your analysis about the reasons for structural inequality matches the things that you choose to do. So if you, as Meredith just said, if you've got a formal barrier, like a law that says that women can't do something, or a policy, changing that policy is the lever to fix that. And there are some people who think that that's enough. As long as there's formal equality and there's no legal differences, there's no differences in rights between men and women, then everything else is down to personal choice, and we should just, that's enough to achieve equality. If you are looking at the next tier of things, you're saying, well, actually formal equality isn't the same as substantive equality, and there's informal barriers that are still preventing us from achieving equality, even though legally we have the same thing. And so in terms of the policies that you might look at for this kind of analysis, you might say something like, what we want to do is on gender pay across their workplace. And so this means looking at all of the employees and reporting on whether there's a pay disparity between men and women. And that would assist you to identify potential discrimination. So if you think that the reasons why men and women are getting paid differently is because there's a lot of managers out there who are not hiring women because they might go off and have babies, and not promoting women because they don't believe that women can do a better job than men, then your answer is about discrimination laws and things like that. So how do we make sure that these people who are misogynistic and treating women differently are addressed so that women can participate equally? If you think that there's underlying structural barriers, which are more the reasons why the results are turning out differently, then you'll go for more structural type of answers. So for example, quotas. If you say, well, the barriers are too great, even if we prosecute people who are discriminating, and even if we remove all the formal barriers, we're still not getting equal results. So we're going to force all ASX 200 companies to have this percentage of women on their boards and this percentage of women in management positions. And so you've seen in the paper, we had the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day recently, and we had women who said, I was never in favour of quotas in the corporate world, but that's because I thought things would change, and in the last 15 years, we still only have 2.5% of women being the CEOs of ASX 200 companies. So this is saying that those underlying structural barriers need a structural answer to those kinds of changes. So let's just talk about quotas for a little bit, because this debate comes up quite often. So what else do you think would be the effect of having a quota in place, say for women in executive positions in companies?
Are there positive effects and negative effects?
How would this address structural barriers? What kind of changes would it bring about?
Would it help with benefits? Like if you have more women at the top, they're more likely to, it'll trickle down because will probably want more women and be more open to different things that would help women.
So they would start changing those structural barriers that, like you said, there's reasons they're not entering the workplace, like that stuff like not having any more 9 or part-time options and everything. So in order to actually be able, because they're now forced to have women in the workplace, they have to tailor what conditions they have on their workplace, like agreements and structures that actually allow it to happen. So
Yep.
then you thus remove those structural barriers, which means that women can naturally just more easily enter into these industries.
Yep, exactly. Cool. What else?
I think it works to change perceptions where people associate masculinity with authority and power and success in business. I think it's more than the example which is about quotas in parliament or executive economies, but yeah, that association led to these kind of like hard-ass ballbuster that you have to be a man, that women can see women being equally successful at changing those ideas about gender and power.
Yep. Okay, so getting people up into those positions might address the discrimination kind of people, those blokes who think that women can't do it, or they're not good enough, or they're innately different, as well as making workplaces respond to the barriers that are preventing women from being able to make those choices. Cool. Okay. So, just some top tips for arguing in women's debates. So the first thing is don't blame the victim. So if we're talking about debates about things like sexual violence or about prostitution, and it is phenomenal how often you see teams get up and attack the individuals that when you do your analysis about the reasons why people are there are really the victims in this situation. So we've all read the horrendous things that footballers think and their views about sexual assault, and even community surveys about sexual assault still show that large sectors of the community think that, for example, a woman dressing in a provocative way is the reason why she will get sexually assaulted, and therefore is blaming her for someone committing a crime against her. So just always, when you're framing your arguments, think about who you're trying to protect or who you're trying to help in a debate, and try and frame your arguments in a way that you're on that side and you can take the moral high ground. Because good feminist debaters will pounce on any opportunity to rail against someone who is attacking women for things that you know the society should be blamed and not the women themselves. The next thing is to look closely for where choice is of women and empowerment of women's choice is not being respected by a team. Because this is a big flaw in a case in a women's debate that you can exploit as a debater. So this idea that women's choices have been controlled by society, controlled by legislation and restricted, is really what feminism is trying to overcome, to make equal opportunity for women to make their own choices for themselves. But it's very easy for teams to delegitimise traditional choices of women in a women's debate. So, for example, undervaluing of women's work, such as caring, such as being mothers, or the unpaid informal work that happens outside of the formal economy, is part of what feminists identify as a structural problem with society. But it's really easy to get up in a debate and talk about how, oh, well, all women should be going back into the workforce, and we want women to be high-flying careers, and construct your arguments in a way that you're saying all women used to have to make one choice, but now we want all women to make a different choice. So if things like that are happening in debates, it's really easy to point out that actually this team is just telling women what to do again. It's just a different thing that they should be doing this time. So try and construct your models and your arguments in a way that empowers women to make their own choices. So for example, I sit on the board of WIRE, which is a women's information and referral service. So it's a community organisation that women can call the phone line or go into the drop-in centre. So we deal with issues about domestic violence, about financial trouble, about homelessness, about all kinds of issues that women face. And WIRE is a feminist organisation in its principles. And so in practice, the way that WIRE avoids paternalism and practices its feminist principles is that it has the underlying principle that women are resourceful and resilient. And so in its model of service, it doesn't tell women what to do. So if a woman calls up and says, look, I'm struggling with this situation of domestic violence at home, the person on the other end of the phone line doesn't say, oh, well, you should leave, or, oh, do you have kids? Oh, you should stay. How much money do you have in the bank account? Oh, you've got no money, you should stay. WIRE doesn't tell women what to do, but gives them information and listens to them to help them make their own choice. So you can see how that principle of choice and empowerment can be translated into a practical context. So the third thing is avoiding essentialism but understanding difference. So there are three different things that I want to talk about here. The first is essentialism can be about what women should do. So this idea of traditional roles. So it's the woman's role to do the cooking and the cleaning, to do the caring, to be the mother. And so we had an example of this recently. In the paper, a royal expert was asked what the role and duty of Kate Middleton was going to be in a modern royal family. And he said, if I'm being honest about it, the duty of Kate Middleton is to make her husband happy and produce an heir. Okay? So you can imagine that if he was asked what Prince William's role in the modern royal family would have been, he wouldn't have said that in reverse. Okay? So this is identifying these ideas that women have traditional roles that they expect to fulfill is this kind of essentialism about what women's roles are in society. The second thing of the arguments that you will make is that it's important because women have different experiences and they'll be able to better represent women than men will be. Okay? So it becomes this really interesting debate between this idea of are men and women exactly the same? Or are women able to better understand other women, and is there some kind of difference? So this sparked a big conversation at Muds on Tuesday. What do people think about those ideas?
I always find it really tricky doing those debates because you can't go too far to one side and say that women are only there to, when you talk about these corporate debates, if they're bringing in corporate identity, because they're caring and more, they're like consulting with people. I really hate that kind of, essentialism that this is the way that women operate and they operate in a different way to men. Then if you go the complete other way and say, well, they're exactly like men and they're operating exactly the same way, then you have the opposite problem, which is what is the additional value that they're bringing. And I've always kind of struggled having that balance between saying, well, they have different experiences and that's maybe the virtue that they bring. I've always had their issues trying to not go too far either of those sides.
Yep. And it is difficult. I think one way to think about it is thinking about the difference between the traditional roles of women, which means that women in society still have different experiences to men. So, for example, because women still are predominantly the primary carers, to have women in Parliament means that you're likely to have more mothers in Parliament, more people who have looked after children in Parliament, and so they'll be able to bring a different perspective to those issues. But it's not saying that that they should always be that way, but it's recognising that the traditional roles and responsibilities and the current inequalities in choices that people make based on culture and society are resulting in different experiences, and therefore, as a representative, you can you have value in that kind of diversity. Yeah.
Do I think that while these inequalities would exist, women are in the best position to work to counter that or
Care about it, to deal with it, and want to become
up until the ideal point where those inequalities don't exist anymore and therefore that particular experience.
Yeah. And you can also argue that there's just a virtue to diversity, like that in a truly equal society where social expectations and there's even evidence I've looked at at work where careers advisors give women and men different careers advice. So girls are encouraged to study different subjects, which lead to different university courses, which lead to different careers. And when I was visiting a debater friend in Sweden, apparently in Sweden, teachers right from primary school are really focusing on trying to teach girls and boys and treat girls and boys in the same way. So for example, they kind of realised that boys would be allowed to climb trees and run around and fall over and scrape their knees, and girls were treated a bit kind of books. They were like, oh, don't climb the trees, little girl, you will hurt yourself. But, oh, boys are strong and tough, like. And so they've identified right down in the way that you're treating children as having an influence in how those people develop and the choices that they make later in life and how they perceive themselves and how they interrelate with one another. And so they've introduced a policy to get their primary school teachers to try and address the root of that inequality. So that's obviously something that's very difficult to prove, and it would probably take a long time in what you're trying to prove in your debate, and you can really have a nuanced approach to what's happening. So, just the last thing I wanted to say is that it's also important to think about having a gendered analysis in debates that are not ostensibly about women, so that you don't read it and go, oh, this is the women's round, they showed us a video about women before the topics went up on the screen. This is saying that there are lots of debates that can be economic debates, social debates, all kinds of different debates, that if you come through a gendered analysis, you'll realise that you'll have excellent second speaker material in that kind of debate. So identifying where policies might disproportionately affect women. So this is not to say run a crazy feminist line in every debate. This is about being able to actually identify where there's a serious gendered analysis that you can do, and